All right, welcome back. Got another video today. I thought I'd do this one right after I did the last book review because it's a good. I think I would recommend getting the Steve Tibble Crusader Armies book and read this one sort of side by side if you have an interest in the Crusades. So this is the Crusades through Arab eyes, pretty self-explanatory. Written by Amin Malouf, obviously Arab historian. This was a bit older than the Tibble book, so this came out in 1984, so it's a bit older, but sort of an interesting, take on it, I guess, and it's regarded sort of as a classic. But I have some issues with it, um, and I'll get into that in a minute. But I think just by way of context, to give some like context, I think I want to we'll go to the map here. So I want this is like a map I think we've all seen probably in public school, like in a high school world history class at some point. If you're maybe probably like like the 20 to 35 age bracket, I guess, um, of the Abbasid Caliphate, like on the eve of the Crusades. But this is a super misleading map. I really hate that they print this map in textbooks when they teach Islamic history, because it's especially when we get to the period of the Crusades. This is just this map makes no sense, and I'm laughing, but this is like anyway laughing for dumb historian reasons. But it's by the time of the Crusades, the Muslim world is extremely fractured. At this point, the Turks, not yet the Ottoman Turks, but sort of the Central Asian Turks, have moved in. They've displaced the Arabs as like the military elite. Um, and so now the Islamic world is fractured between these different sort of principalities, beyliks, Turkic warlords, and and then whoever was sort of in charge, like on a local level. And this was, but it wasn't all bad for average people, even if they were Dhimmi or Muslim. It's sort of a continuity. Basically, the people that were in charge, sort of on a local level, remain more or less in place. It was more so, okay, who the lord is that you're paying taxes to changes, right? This is super common in antiquity and medieval history. So there's a pretty good continuity of life. However, it doesn't change the fact that you've got this big map and this huge Islamic empire. Well, okay, the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad is not really in control of most of these places. Um, so this is sort of the context of the Crusades in the 11th century. The Franks, the European kingdoms, are sort of rising, um, and you have a weak Muslim heartland that's open to attack. And now the Europeans, after being beaten up for so long by the power of the Islamic armies, are able to come in and sort of deal a blow. And then, of course, you have the Byzantines sort of playing both sides, and they're always up to something. Anyway, but that's right. This is the background of the Crusades. So weak Muslims, relatively speaking, on a sort of, well, weak on sort of from a perspective of a centralized empire, but of course, um, the Turkish and the Saracen in quotation marks armies, if you want to use that term, are quite effective horse archers. That's what we talked about in the last video with the Tibble book. How the Crusaders had to get creative and learn all these new fighting techniques to beat those horse archers and sort of the back and forth. But anyway, so this book looks at the events of the Crusades from the perspective of the Arab chroniclers. Now, I think if you've read a lot of books, like just general histories about the Crusades, you probably wouldn't find anything like new information. It's the same story. It's just with the Arab sort of spin. Um, I will say, though, one issue I have with Malouf's writing style, and I'll read a passage just so you can get an idea, is it's kind of sort of preachy in some parts, and that's, I think, can be a turnoff for a lot of people. Personally, when I read history books, because I deal with this type of history, um, bad things are going to happen, right? You have atrocities, you have violence, and we have to, if you're a good historian, I think you have to sort of take a step back and, okay, these things happen, but we have to be careful about moralizing too much, because then you're not really writing history. You're writing like, you know, morality tales. We don't want to do that. So I'll read a passage and hopefully you might be able to see what I'm getting at here. So this is during the, I believe this is during. Oh, this is Baldwin. When Baldwin is leading the Crusades. So the situation in the Armenian city uh, uh, was indeed worrying. The few Muslims who had been able to leave had brought news of the strange events there. In February, a Frankish chief by the name of Baldwin had arrived in command of the hundreds of knights, more than 2,000 foot soldiers, uh, and more than 2,000 foot soldiers, excuse me. Thoros, an old Armenian prince and ruler of the city, had appealed to him to strengthen the city garrison against repeated attacks by Turkish warriors. But Baldwin refused to act as a mere mercenary. He demanded to be formally named the legitimate successor of Thoros. The latter, aged and childless, agreed. An official ceremony was held in accordance with Armenian custom. Thoros was dressed in a loose-fitting white robe, and Baldwin, naked to the waist, slipped under his father, in quotation marks, father's foot, and pressed their bodies together. Uh, Then it was the turn of the mother, again in quotation marks, the wife of Thoros, against whom Baldwin now crept between robe and naked flesh before the amused regard of the onlookers, who whispered that this rite, conceived for the adoption of children, seemed somewhat inappropriate when the son was a great hairy knight. The soldiers of the Muslim army laughed out loud, and long as the pictured scene that had just been described to them, but it was the sequel of the account that chilled them. A few days later, after the ceremony, father and mother were lynched by a mob urged on by the son, who watched impassively as they were put to death, and then proceeded to proclaim himself as the Count of Edessa. He had appointed his Frankish companions to all the important posts in the army and the administration. So I think, you know, the issue, from my point of view, isn't like the narrative or the information. Like, I'm not like a Crusades expert. I mean, this could very well have been the case of what Baldwin did, but I think that the tone, this is the issue I have. It's like, well, you have the Muslim onlookers, and then no, it's this like Frankish barbarian that's come in and um, taken over the Armenian Edessa. And just again to relate it back to the Tibble book, because I think he does a better job of just asking some common sense questions about this. Of like, okay, if the Crusaders are so unpopular and are just this foreign invading army, how are they able to stay there so long? First of all, and second of all, why would anyone put up with it? And if they were disliked and able to stay so long, how were they able to raise these armies, these pretty significant forces, and able to operate in the Holy Land for so long? So again, it's fine, to read this book, I think, and if you want to get sort of an alternate take, and he does have a pretty extensive bibliography. Let me see. Um, just one second. I'm gonna uh, take a look here at the. Um, I do these things off the cuff, so I apologize um, for the delay. So he cites quite a number of these different Arab historians. So, for example, um, on the Battle of Tyre and other matters concerning the city, see M. Shabab, Tir al-Epoque des Crusades. There's my French pronunciation. Adrien Maisonneuve, Paris, 1975. And he also describes the Aleppan Kemal al-Din ibn al-Adham, who lived from 1192 to 1262, devoted only the first part of his life to writing the history of his city. The original text of his History of Aleppo was published in the Institut Français of Damascus in 1968. And again, I'm not going to get into the weeds with all the different sources, but he cites a number of these Arabic chroniclers, and it seems most of them are um, either translated into French or they were, French editions of the Arabic chronicles. Um, and Here's another example where I get a little annoyed with his tone. So this is in the bibliographic essay where he describes the notes and sources. So this is about chapter 3. The Frankish chronicles of the epoch contain numerous accounts of the acts of cannibalism committed by the Frankish armies in Mahara in 1098, and they all agree. Until the 19th century, the facts of these events were included in the works of European historians. For example, Michaud's Histoire des Crusades, published 1817 to 22. In the 20th century, however, these accounts have generally been concealed, perhaps in the interests of the West's, quote, civilizing mission. Grousset does not even mention this in the 3 volumes of his history. Runciman is content with a single allusion. The army was suffering from starvation, and cannibalism seemed, quote, the army was, quote, suffering from starvation, and cannibalism seemed the only solution, end quote. Um, so again, I sort of see I guess Malouf was Lebanese, and it says he was the director of Beirut Daily, and he was the editor of a French African paper. Um, so I sort of see, Malouf is definitely like one of these Arab, post-colonial. I don't know if maybe he was described that way or who described himself that way, but one of these Arab historians coming out of the colonial period. So I can sort of understand on some level the frustration maybe he has to like European powers or whatever. But I think when it comes to writing history, we need to stick with, like I said earlier in the video, just not moralizing these things. Okay, there was clearly cannibalism that happened as a result of the conditions in the field for the Crusader armies. Um, but these again atrocities are going to happen in war. This is just reality. We can't get hung up on it. Um, and The other aspect I think is a little annoying, and I know he uses in the book he sort of uses Frank as like this catch-all, right? But this is why. But it's sort of like kind of flattens what was going on. And again, this is in the Tibble book, right? You have Frankish knights that are from Europe, but you also have the Turkomans. The Franks marry local women, and they have mixed children, that are Arab Christian, Frankish children, and they become part of the armies over the generation. So just to say it's like the Franks or like this Frankish army. It's kind of misleading and a little annoying. I mean, and I understand when you're writing, you have to sort of make these sacrifices just for clarity's sake. But this is why when I discuss Ottoman history, well, maybe I use the term Turk, but we have to remember that the Ottoman army, especially, is not a Turkish army. And even the rulers of the Ottoman Empire were not, Turkish from Central Asia, right? This is a different sort of thing that emerges over time. But anyway, this is getting a little technical, but um, so I guess my ultimate verdict with this book, I think it's worth a look. Maybe get it from your library, or I'm sure there's a PDF online, if you want it for reference. But I wouldn't necessarily rely on it as the only source for the Crusades from the Muslim perspective. I'm gonna do some more research into this maybe and do another follow-up video and see if there's some other books I can find, and maybe some even primary sources that have been put into English, because I think that would be helpful. So I'll take a look at that and maybe do another video on that subject. So hope you like this video, and I'll talk to you on the next one.